"Touch me again, and I will show you what happens when you forget your place." The words sliced through the noise of the chemistry lab like a blade through glass. Every conversation, every laugh, every shuffle of papers ceased at once. The fluorescent lights above flickered uncertainly, casting pale shadows over the white-tiled room. 20 students stared, motionless, their faces pale with disbelief. Then, before anyone could react, Bradley Cooper, the school's golden boy and the principal's pride, lunged across the table. His hand shot forward, fingers wrapping around the black teacher's throat with shocking aggression. The sound of the impact, the scrape of shoes on linoleum, the metallic clatter of a stool falling, sent a wave of gasps through the class. A bottle of ethanol tumbled from the counter and burst, the sharp chemical scent bleeding into the air. The teacher did not struggle. His posture remained eerily still, his calm defying the chaos around him. His eyes did not widen in panic. They narrowed, unblinking, steady as stone. The veins in his neck tightened against the boy's grip, but his composure never faltered. Bradley's voice came next, loud and cutting. "You think you can talk to me like that? You are just a washed-up soldier pretending to teach chemistry." His words carried the arrogance of someone who had never been held accountable. His friends standing near the back erupted in laughter. Several raised their phones, recording eagerly, their faces glowing with the blue light of the screens. One of them whispered with cruel amusement, "He is finished. The old man is about to beg." But Elijah Carter did not beg. His voice, low and deliberate, carried across the room with unnerving calm. "Let go of me, son," the laughter grew. It echoed against the tiled walls, brittle and uncomfortable, like glass cracking under pressure. The lab assistant froze halfway to the door, torn between stepping in and preserving his job. No one moved. The air had turned heavy, thick with fear and fascination. A few students exchanged uneasy glances, whispering beneath their breath, "He is insane. He will be fired if he hits him back." Bradley's smirk widened. The thrill of power flashed in his eyes. "What are you going to do, huh? Teach me a lesson?" His grip tightened, his knuckles white, the motion reckless and unthinking. Then something shifted. Elijah's gaze, calm until now, changed. The stillness in his face hardened, and for a fleeting second, every student in the room saw something different, something dangerous. His eyes no longer looked like a teacher's, they looked like a soldier's. There was precision in them, control, cold, quiet power that came from years of surviving things far worse than arrogance. He reached up, not with anger but with deliberate patience, and began to remove the student's hand from his throat, one finger at a time. The gesture was almost tender in its precision, terrifying in its restraint. Bradley tried to resist, but the teacher's grip was immovable, firm without force, commanding without violence. When the last finger slipped free, Elijah released him and stepped back, straightening his collar with slow dignity. Their eyes met again. For the first time, Bradley's confidence wavered. The laughter behind him faltered into silence. The students could feel it, the balance of power shifting, the weight of something greater settling into the room. Elijah's tone remained steady, his voice softer than before, yet carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "You have just made the worst mistake of your life." No one moved. The students' phones remained raised, their hands trembling slightly as they continued recording, unsure whether to keep filming or lower their devices. The room was frozen in suspended disbelief, every sound magnified. The hum of the ceiling fan, the drip of liquid from the broken bottle, the rhythmic beat of nervous breaths. Bradley stood motionless, unsure of what to say, the smirk dying on his lips. The teacher turned away, his calm composure unbroken, while the air around them felt electric, thick with a warning no one could yet understand. And then, as if narrating a prophecy, the final line echoed through the silence. They thought it was harmless bullying, a spoiled boy flaunting his privilege before a crowd. But within minutes, the world would learn what happens when arrogance forgets who it is touching. Mr. Elijah Carter was not a man shaped by ease or indulgence. Long before the sterile scent of chalk dust and the steady hum of classroom lights became his daily rhythm, he had lived through the sound of mortars, the echo of orders barked through static-filled radios, and the haunting silence that follows when men stop breathing. For 10 years, he wore the uniform of a U.S. Army sergeant, serving in 2 tours overseas. He had led men through deserts where the horizon never ended, carried brothers bleeding from shrapnel wounds to safety, and stood watch through nights where one mistake meant death. Those years carved discipline into his bones, and when he returned home, he was not broken. He was simply quiet, a man who had learned the strength of silence. When the war ended, Elijah did not seek medals or applause. He sought purpose. Using his military grant, he went back to school, earning a degree in education. He could have taken a job that demanded less patience and offered more comfort, but teaching called to him. He believed knowledge could rebuild what war had torn apart, not just in nations, but in people. Every experiment, every formula, every patient correction of a student's mistake was his way of building a world grounded in order, discipline, and respect. His students saw him as strict, but never cruel. His colleagues described him as the kind of man who spoke little but whose words, when they came, carried the weight of command. He never raised his voice because he never needed to. Respect to Elijah was not demanded. It was earned through consistency. His presence alone commanded it. That calm, unshakable composure came from the lessons his parents had instilled in him long before the military ever hardened his resolve. His mother, a nurse who worked double shifts at the local hospital, raised him with a quiet resilience. She would return home past midnight, exhausted but smiling, telling him, "Hard work doesn't break you, son. It builds you." His father, a retired firefighter, taught him how to remain steady in the face of panic. "When everyone else is losing their head," he would say, "you keep yours." That is what leadership looks like. But the truest lesson of all came from his grandfather, a man who had seen both segregation and war. Sitting on the old porch swing one evening, the elder Carter looked at his grandson and said, "Control isn't weakness. It's power disguised as peace." Those words stayed with Elijah through every trial, from the battlefield to the classroom. It was that control that separated men from boys, soldiers from tyrants, and leaders from bullies. Bradley Cooper was the opposite of everything Elijah represented. Born into wealth and privilege, Bradley had never been told no. His father, Richard Cooper, owned half the town, car dealerships, construction firms, and, most importantly, a controlling influence on the local school board. The Cooper name carried weight in every corner of the city. Teachers knew it, principals feared it, and students admired it. Bradley grew up learning that money could rewrite rules, that apologies were optional, and that respect was something others owed him by default. His friends followed him not out of admiration, but survival. Being close to Bradley meant protection, free passes, special treatment, and social security. He strutted through the hallways with the confidence of someone untouchable, his arrogance polished by years of indulgence. When he mocked other students, teachers turned a blind eye. When he failed tests, grades mysteriously changed. The system bent for him, and he never questioned why. Then Elijah Carter arrived. From the moment Bradley stepped into his chemistry class, he knew this teacher was different. The man's eyes missed nothing. His assignments were fair but strict. His grading is honest. When Bradley mocked a janitor one afternoon, Elijah made him scrub the floors himself. When he plagiarized a research paper, Elijah handed it back with a red F at the top and a simple note: "Integrity cannot be borrowed." For the first time in his life, Bradley felt humiliated. It was a humiliation he could not forgive. His father's money had always solved problems, but Elijah Carter was a problem that refused to bend. Each time Bradley tested him, the teacher's calm composure became a mirror that reflected his own weakness back at him. The respect Elijah commanded through silence was something Bradley could not imitate, and envy turned into hatred, and so arrogance began to plot. The day in the lab was not spontaneous. It was orchestrated, a trap set with precision. Bradley and his friends decided to record the confrontation. The plan was simple: provoke the teacher until he snapped, get a reaction, twist it online, watch him lose everything. In their minds, it would be the perfect revenge, a public downfall for the man who dared to treat them like equals. But what Bradley failed to understand was that Elijah Carter was not just a man in a lab coat. He was a man who had stared down real violence and learned that control was the sharpest weapon of all. The composure that made students mock him was the same discipline that had once kept him alive under fire. No one in that room that morning understood the kind of storm that lived behind his silence. They saw only a teacher. They had no idea they were about to witness what happens when patience stops being peace and becomes justice. Dignity does not shout. It waits. Then it roars. Bradley Cooper had always enjoyed the sound of laughter when it was directed at someone else. It gave him a sense of control, a familiar thrill that came from being the center of attention. But as the days passed after that first confrontation, his taunts toward Mr. Elijah Carter began to evolve from smug remarks to deliberate cruelty. The respect that once filled the lab evaporated, replaced by tension that lingered like static in the air. It began subtly. A misplaced comment here, a sarcastic laugh there. When Elijah turned to write formulas on the whiteboard, Bradley would mimic his tone, mocking the way he pronounced chemical compounds. His friends snickered, emboldened by his audacity. When Elijah demonstrated an experiment, Bradley would mutter, "Is this chemistry or boot camp?" and toss an insolent smirk at his classmates. But soon, subtlety was not enough. He started spilling small amounts of chemicals near Elijah's desk, forcing the teacher to stop his lecture to clean up the mess. Once, he even accidentally broke a beaker, the glass scattering like tiny shards of defiance. When Elijah bent to pick them up, Bradley leaned over and said loudly enough for the class to hear, "Careful, Sergeant Scrub. Wouldn't want you to hurt yourself cleaning my mess again." The words hung in the air. Sharp as broken glass, the class laughed. Some out of amusement, others because it felt safer than silence. A few students, however, could not quite meet Elijah's eyes afterward. Through it all, Elijah Carter remained still. His hand continued to move across papers with the same steady precision as always. He marked equations, adjusted grades, and carried on his lessons as though the insults were invisible. His face did not harden, nor did it soften. It was calm, unnervingly so. But something in his stillness began to feel different. Every time Bradley tried to provoke him, that calm grew heavier, more deliberate. It was no longer the quiet of avoidance. It was the quiet of calculation. It was as if Elijah was watching, assessing, learning something about his tormentor that Bradley himself did not yet understand. Students began to feel it, even if they could not explain it. The laughter started sounding forced. The jokes no longer landed the same way. Bradley's friends found themselves exchanging uneasy glances when their teacher's gaze lingered just a second too long on the bully before returning to his work. One afternoon, while Elijah was demonstrating a reaction using hydrogen peroxide, Bradley whispered to his friends, "Watch this." He leaned forward and deliberately dropped a piece of metal into the solution, causing a sudden fizzing eruption that nearly spilled over the counter. Students gasped. Elijah stepped back instinctively, the foam bubbling inches from his hand. "Guess you should have paid attention in basic training, huh?" Bradley said, laughing as though he had told the funniest joke in the world. For a moment, Elijah said nothing. He simply stared at the experiment, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Then he calmly turned off the Bunsen burner, cleaned the spill, and resumed his lecture. "Hydrogen peroxide," he said evenly, "is a volatile compound. It does not react violently unless provoked. Keep provoking it, and eventually it will explode." The students went silent. Bradley forced a smirk, pretending the words did not land, but something about the way Elijah said it made the laughter feel hollow. In the following days, the tension deepened. Elijah's lessons continued with the same precision, but the air between him and Bradley thickened with something unspoken. Even when the class laughed, the sound never reached the teacher's eyes. At lunch, whispers spread across the cafeteria. "He's too calm," one student said, stirring her drink nervously. "It's like he's waiting for something." "Waiting?" her friend asked. "Yeah, waiting to do something." Across the room, Bradley heard the whispers and grinned. "He's scared," he said loudly. "That's all it is. All bark, no bite." He slammed his tray down and added, "That man wouldn't dare touch me." The younger students exchanged uneasy looks. They had seen enough to know that arrogance was a fragile thing, and Bradley was pressing it too far. Back in the lab the next day, the tension reached its peak. Bradley was restless, pacing during the lesson, tapping his pencil loudly on the desk. Elijah continued to teach without reacting. Each time the sound grew louder, the teacher paused for a moment, then resumed writing on the board. Finally, Bradley could not take the indifference any longer. "You think ignoring me makes you better?" he said suddenly, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "You are nothing but a washed-up soldier hiding behind formulas." Elijah did not respond. He continued drawing the molecular structure of ethanol on the board. "I bet you got discharged because you could not handle real pressure," Bradley continued. The laughter that followed was uneasy, thinner than before. A few of his friends chuckled, but others turned away. They had seen Elijah's eyes that day in the lab when Bradley first grabbed him, cold and precise, like a man capable of things no one could quite imagine. One of the younger students, a small girl who always sat near the back, leaned toward her friend and whispered, "Careful. Sometimes the quiet ones surprise you." The rest of the class fell silent, pretending not to hear, but everyone did. The words carried more weight than they should have. For a moment, Elijah looked over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. Bradley met his eyes and forced another grin, but it did not feel as confident as before. Something about that brief glance, calm, unblinking, almost surgical, unsettled him in a way he could not explain. Elijah returned to his work without a word. The marker squeaked across the board, tracing equations with the same measured precision as before. The silence grew suffocating. Every scrape of a chair, every rustle of paper sounded too loud. When the bell rang, the students filed out in silence, their laughter forgotten. Bradley stayed behind for a moment, staring at the back of the teacher who did not even turn to acknowledge him. The storm was coming, and though no one could see it yet, everyone could feel the pressure building, silent, steady, and inevitable. The tension that had been simmering for weeks finally snapped like a live wire. Bradley's arrogance, inflated by privilege and unchecked by consequence, reached its breaking point. As Elijah Carter stood at the front of the room explaining a reaction on the board, the scrape of a chair echoed behind him. Bradley rose, his jaw clenched, eyes burning with fury. The class sensed it before it happened. A heavy silence fell, the kind that presses down on lungs and slows time. Elijah turned slightly, his posture calm, his tone unchanged. "Mr. Cooper, take your seat," he said, his voice carrying quiet authority, but Bradley did not sit. His lips twisted into a sneer. "You really think you can tell me what to do?" he spat. "You think this is the army? This is my school, not your little war zone." He stepped forward, closing the space between them. Elijah did not move. His hand rested loosely on the desk, still steady. The boy's friends watched with nervous excitement, phones out, cameras ready. One of them whispered, "This is it. He's gonna lose it." Bradley's voice rose, louder now, cracking under his own rage. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone. You think I'll just let that go?" "Walk away," Elijah said, still calm, eyes fixed on him. But arrogance does not listen to reason. With a sudden, reckless burst, Bradley lunged forward, his hand snapping around Elijah's throat. The room erupted in gasps. A beaker rolled off the counter and shattered. The sound of glass breaking punctuated the collective shock. For a few seconds it looked as though the teacher would finally lose control. But he did not. His movements were slow, deliberate, frighteningly composed. He reached up, unclasped Bradley's hand one finger at a time, and stepped backward, freeing himself without struggle. The class stared. The way he moved was not defensive. It was measured, trained. When he spoke, his voice carried the same calm that had unnerved them for weeks. "You want to act like a man?" he said evenly. "Then face one." He turned to the class, his tone firm and steady. "Call the principal," he said, "and do not stop recording." Bradley's grip faltered. He blinked, momentarily unsure whether to continue or retreat. "You're finished, old man," he sneered, forcing a laugh that did not sound convincing. "You just assaulted me. I'll have your job by tomorrow." Elijah did not respond with anger. Instead, he opened the top drawer of his desk and withdrew a laminated folder. He placed it gently on the counter, unfolded it, and turned it toward the cameras. Inside was his military service ID, a series of commendations, and a photograph of him standing beside a decorated general, receiving a Medal of Valor. The room fell utterly silent. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade. The color drained from Bradley's face as he stared at the folder. Elijah's words came slow and sharp, each syllable deliberate. "You think respect is something you demand," he said, "but I earned mine in places where arrogance does not survive 5 seconds." He did not raise his voice, yet every student heard him as if the words were carved into the walls. Bradley's smirk vanished. His friends lowered their phones slightly, no longer recording out of amusement, but awe. Before anyone could process what was happening, the door burst open. 2 teachers rushed in, followed by the principal, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "What is going on here?" she demanded. Dozens of hands pointed at Bradley. "He attacked Mr. Carter," one student shouted. "He grabbed him." The teachers moved between them as Elijah stepped aside. He was composed, unflustered, his breathing steady. He handed the principal the same folder, along with a small USB drive from his desk. "This," he said, "is security footage from the classroom camera. It has everything." The principal's face drained of color as she looked from Bradley to Elijah. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, He raised a hand politely, stopping her. "No need for explanations," he said. "I will be filing charges after this class. But do not worry. I have been trained to stay calm under pressure." A murmur spread through the students. Phones were still recording, capturing every second. The trembling bully, the unshaken teacher, the quiet reversal of power. Someone whispered, "This is going online right now." By the time the principal escorted Bradley from the room, the video had already begun spreading across social media. Within minutes, it reached the school's student forum. Within an hour, it was on national feeds. The image of a white teenager gripping the throat of a black veteran-turned-teacher, and the calm composure that followed, sparked outrage, admiration, and disbelief across the country. That evening, the story led every major news network. Commentators debated classroom discipline, race, and respect. But what caught the nation's attention was not the violence. It was Elijah Carter's restraint. Veterans recognized him almost immediately. Old comrades posted comments beneath the video. "Sergeant Carter, calm under fire. Always was." Another wrote, "We knew he'd never lose his composure. That man taught us courage." The next day, the same student who had whispered weeks earlier uploaded the full video. The caption read simply, "He survived a war." The bully did not survive his own ego. The clip exploded overnight. Millions watched as Elijah stood tall in his classroom, eyes steady, posture firm, embodying the quiet power of discipline. It became more than a viral moment. It became a symbol. Parents showed their children the video as an example of restraint and dignity. Soldiers commented on how rare it was to see such control under provocation. Teachers across the country shared it as a lesson that authority does not come from shouting, it comes from presence. By the time morning came, Elijah Carter's name was everywhere. The school's website crashed under the weight of media requests. News anchors replayed the moment on loop, the choke, the release, the calm stare, and that single devastating sentence. "You think respect is something you demand, but I earned mine in places where arrogance doesn't survive 5 seconds." It was not just a confrontation, it was a reckoning. And for Bradley Cooper, who had spent his life mistaking privilege for power, that moment became the defining lesson he never intended to learn. By dawn, the quiet suburban street in front of the school had transformed into a circus of cameras, microphones, and flashing lights. Reporters huddled by the gates, shouting questions over one another, their breath fogging in the early morning air. "Mr. Carter, how did you stay so calm? Did you know you were being filmed? Do you forgive the student?" Elijah arrived before the first bell rang, walking with his usual deliberate stride, his shoulders straight, his expression unreadable. He did not stop for questions. He simply nodded politely and entered through the staff door. The calm at the center of a storm he had never sought. Inside, the atmosphere had changed. Teachers who once greeted him with brief nods now looked at him with a quiet reverence. Students whispered his name as he passed in the hallway, not with mockery but with respect. A few even stood aside, lowering their phones in embarrassment as if realizing too late how small their laughter had been weeks before. The entire school seemed to carry a strange mixture of pride and guilt. Pride for what he represented, guilt for how easily they had allowed cruelty to unfold before them. Bradley Cooper did not come to school that day. He would not return for a long time. His suspension was immediate and indefinite. The superintendent released a formal statement by noon, apologizing publicly to Mr. Elijah Carter and condemning the actions that had led to the incident. His words were brief but powerful. No man should ever have to choose between dignity and defense in a place of learning. Bradley's father tried to use his influence to contain the fallout, but the harder he pushed, the faster the story spread. The attempt to silence it only amplified the message. Major networks ran segments titled "Discipline Over Violence: The Teacher Who Chose Calm." Veterans organizations issued statements of solidarity, calling Elijah's restraint a testament to true strength. The superintendent invited Elijah to a press conference 2 days later. He stood behind a wooden podium, his medals and documents displayed beside him, the crowd of journalists waiting in tense silence. Cameras clicked like applause. The superintendent spoke first, then turned the microphone to Elijah. He began not with triumph, but with humility. "I did what I was trained to do," he said. "I stayed calm because chaos feeds on reaction, and I have seen what happens when people forget that control saves lives." His words were measured, firm, and deeply human. Then, from the audience, a man rose, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, wearing a faded military pin on his lapel. He stood at attention, tears glinting behind his glasses, and saluted. "Sergeant Carter," he said clearly, his voice resonant and steady, "you did not just teach chemistry. You taught the world discipline." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the room erupted in applause. It was not loud or frenzied. It was the kind of applause that carries weight, a standing acknowledgement of character, of restraint, of something deeper than heroism. Later that evening, Elijah drove home in quiet reflection. His phone had been buzzing nonstop, but he ignored it. When he finally stepped through his front door, he sat at the kitchen table and dialed the one number that mattered. His mother answered on the second ring, her voice weary but full of warmth. "Baby," she said softly, "I saw you on television." Elijah smiled faintly, his hand rubbing the edge of his collar. "I just did what I had to do, Mama." Her voice trembled with pride. "No, you did more than that. You didn't just survive that moment, Elijah. You reminded them who you are and who they could be." For the first time in days, he allowed himself to exhale. Outside, the noise of the world continued. Interviews, debates, and broadcasts. But inside his home, there was only stillness. The kind of peace that comes not from victory, but from knowing that dignity had spoken louder than rage ever could. In the months that followed, Elijah Carter transformed a moment of humiliation into a movement of hope. He declined book deals, television offers, and political endorsements. Instead, he focused on something far greater than fame. Using the flood of donations that poured in from veterans associations and community groups, he founded the Valor Academy Initiative, a mentorship program that paired retired soldiers with troubled youth from both broken and privileged backgrounds. His mission was simple but profound: to teach respect through discipline, not fear. The program began as a small pilot in his own city, operating out of a converted community center. Within weeks, dozens of teenagers enrolled. Some court-ordered, others sent by parents desperate to find guidance their children would actually listen to. The veterans who volunteered brought with them the same quiet strength Elijah had shown in his classroom. They did not preach. They demonstrated. Through boxing lessons, science projects, survival training, and open conversations about life, they taught the boys and girls what real strength looked like: control, humility, and honor. Word spread quickly. Local news outlets covered the program, then national media followed. Schools from other states reached out, asking for chapters of their own. Within a year, the Valor Academy Initiative had spread across 3 states, supported by both government funding and private grants. Thousands of teenagers who once saw authority as an enemy began to understand it as guidance. Teachers noticed fewer fights. Parents noticed more respect. Even the tone of classrooms began to change. Quieter, more focused, more aware. As Elijah's legacy grew, so did the silence surrounding Bradley Cooper. Once the school's golden boy, he became a ghost in his own town. Colleges withdrew their offers. His father's business empire began to crumble as partners distanced themselves from the scandal. Contracts were canceled, dealerships were sold, and whispers followed the family everywhere they went. People no longer referred to Bradley as the star quarterback or the board member's son. They remembered him only as the boy who grabbed the wrong man. The school where it all happened changed too. The district implemented strict anti-bullying reforms, introducing programs modeled after Elijah's approach to discipline and respect. Every teacher underwent new training. Every student was required to attend an annual seminar on empathy and accountability. The change was more than procedural. It was cultural. One morning, before the new semester began, a small ceremony took place in the chemistry lab where the confrontation had occurred. Students, teachers, and board members gathered as a brass plaque was unveiled above the counter where Bradley's arrogance had once exploded. The inscription read, "In honor of Mr. Elijah Carter, the teacher who taught the world what strength looks like." The room fell silent. Some students who had once laughed that day wiped their eyes quietly. The lab, once tainted by humiliation, now stood as a monument to resilience. Online, the impact never faded. Hashtags like "Stand with Mr. Carter" and "Discipline over Violence" trended for weeks. Millions reposted the clip, calling it a masterclass in self-control. Parents used it to teach their children about respect. Soldiers used it to remind civilians what real strength means. Elijah never called himself a hero. He simply said he had done what was right. But to millions watching, he had become a living symbol of a truth too often forgotten. Power that does not need to shout is the kind that changes the world. They mocked him, believing discipline was weakness. But in a single unforgettable moment, arrogance collapsed, and Elijah Carter's calm redefined the meaning of strength. He did not raise his fists. He raised awareness. Power is not born from rage, but from restraint, from knowing when to fight and when to teach. His story became a living lesson. Power and youth mean nothing without respect, and silence, when held with purpose, can be louder than any scream. What would you have done if you were in that lab? Comment below, and share this story if you believe dignity will always defeat hatred.